During Lent, we're preaching this sermon series called A Gentle Word to an Aging Empire, a little small section of Paul's letter to the church at Rome. Our gospel lesson this morning comes from the Gospel according to St. Luke. It's Luke's Good Friday story, chapter 23. Two other men, both criminals, were crucified with Jesus. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there, along with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God? Since you are under the same condemnation, we're punished justly, for we're getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong." And then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus responded, "Friend, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." And then from the Christian epistles, the lesson is from Romans 12, verse 17. Paul says, "Repay no one evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all." Pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Nero is 16 years old when he becomes emperor of all Rome in 54 AD. And he's 19 years old when Paul writes his letter to the church at Rome in 57 AD. Ironically, the older Nero gets and the more experience he acquires, the worse he gets. His legendary brutality is rivaled only by his notorious ineptitude. It's not a pleasant combination, incompetence and cruelty. Now, Paul is horrified by the executive leadership in Rome. To him, it is literally sophomoric. Rome is being run by a high school sophomore. It's adolescent. And so when he writes his letter to the Christians in Rome, he tucks in a little section. I've been calling it A Gentle Word to an Aging Empire. It's sometimes called Paul's Sermon on the Mount. And in this little section, Paul paints a portrait or snaps a photograph of the ideal Christian from 15 different angles. "Let love be genuine," says St. Paul. "Hate what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Outdo one another in showing honor." 15 different angles to this photograph. And it's as if with this photograph, Paul is painting a picture of the anti-Nero. Paul says, think about what Nero might do and do the exact opposite. Instead, be like Jesus. And then Paul says, repay no one evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. Eschew vengeance, he says. Never repay evil with violence. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth? Never, says Paul. Look, no one will blame you if you lash out when you are wrong. That's pure justice. But we are interested in more than justice. We are interested in mercy, and mercy is larger than justice. And so Paul says, repay no one evil for evil. And then there's that wonderful but. I'm interested in what comes after the but. Repay no one evil for evil, but. Words like but and yet and still are called adversative conjunctions. That is to say, they are seams or junctures or joints in the middle of a sentence that show opposition or contrast. What comes after the but is the opposite of what comes before the but. Repay no one evil for evil, but. Repay no one evil for evil instead. Repay no one evil for evil. Instead, take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. That's not what I was expecting. I might have expected be a peacemaker, be kind, be friendly, be a doormat even, but nobility? Who was looking for nobility? Now, the Greek word, the New Revised Standard Version translates as noble, is a very straightforward, very common Greek word called kalos. Kalos is a beast of burden in the Greek language. It appears 102 times in the New Testament. At its simplest, most straightforward translation, it just means good. But Paul wants to mean more than good here. There are two words for good in the Greek language. The first one is called agathos. Agathos means good in the sense of right and correct and law-abiding. Those are good things. Agathos is a good word because it means good and it's a good concept. Agathos is a ramrod, straight Marine saluting his superiors or the flag. At its extreme, however, agathos becomes the church lady. I'm not making fun of this word. It's a good word. We need the law-abiding. Agathos is the 10 Commandments, all 10 of them. Not 7, not 8, not 9, but all 10, all the time. That's not what Paul means here. He uses the other word for good in Greek, which is kalos. Kalos is good in the sense of beautiful and attractive and charming and winsome. Kalos is the Platonic ideal of whatever you're talking about. It's the highest, it's the best, it's the most perfect. Kalos is something which achieves the highest purpose for which it was created. Think of your Platonic ideal in the world of cars. Think of the epitome in the kingdom of cars, something that is accomplishing its highest purpose. The Platonic ideal of car. That's kalos. Think of the most beautiful tree you've ever seen. Imagine the tree God was thinking about when she came up with the concept of treeness. The Platonic ideal of tree, kalos. Think of your ideal colleague. Think of the Platonic ideal of colleague. Think about the colleague than whom none greater can be conceived. This is my friend Dan Searby. He's the one on the left. Dan has a place 6 doors down from my house in Michigan, at Northport Point. So Dan has to walk past my house to get anywhere he wants to go. It's the only place to go. When Dan's not living in Michigan, he lives on Long Island. When I lived in Old Greenwich, I could practically see Dan's house across Long Island Sound. Dan is brilliant. He reads omnivorously. And as a devout Roman Catholic, he has this vivid, colorful relationship with Jesus. And so every day during August, Dan walks past my house with his Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, Mr. Darcy. Now, Mr. Darcy, named for the Jane Austen character, of course. He's British. Mr. Darcy is adorable. Mr. Darcy weighs about 10 pounds. It takes 10 Mr. Darcys to equal one Doogie. And one day I told Dan that his dog was adorable, and Dan scoffs dismissively, and he says, this little lap dog, this is nothing but a small emergency backup dog. And I love the way he talks about his own dog, a small emergency backup dog, and then he points to Doogie, who's romping with Mr. Darcy, and he said, now that is the Platonic ideal of dogness. It's kalos. The zenith of humanity. The greatest nobility. And so if you will repay no one evil for evil, if you will eschew violence and refuse to avenge, people will not only want to know you, they will want to be you. I don't think I've told you before about my friends Judd and Judy Shields. Judd and Judy were members of my first church, my Philadelphia church, 2 of the finest Christian people I've ever met, unfailingly faithful in the pews every Sunday they were in town. When I met them in the 1980s, Judd was the chief of pediatrics at Abington Hospital. My son Michael was born at Abington Hospital and was a patient in Judd's practice until we moved away when Michael was 2 years old. So imagine in your mind's eye the quintessential small-town physician. Bald pate, wire-rimmed glasses, etched face, kind eyes, erudite. Whenever I thought of Judge Shields, I thought about one of Norman Rockwell's kind physicians. Now, Judd and Judy had a very troubled grandson. I think he was about 17 years old at the time. I forget what vexed this young man. Maybe it was schizophrenia, maybe it was bipolar disorder, but in any case, he was so troubled and angry that one day when his parents came home from work, he shot them with a double-barrel shotgun. and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, the last I heard, Judd and Judy went to visit their grandson at the state penitentiary every single week. Last I heard, this 17-year-old man was working on his GED. And when Judd and Judy visited, he would cry and say, I have no idea why I pulled those triggers. This is the young man who murdered their daughter and son-in-law. And yet there they are every single week in that state penitentiary. Now this makes Judd and Judy's other children furious. They are enraged that their parents would want to keep a relationship with a young man who has wrought so much havoc in their lives. So these are the brothers and sisters of the victims, aunts and uncles of the troubled young man. They are furious. They would not talk to their parents for years and months. And, I lost track of Judy and Judd, and I haven't heard whether they reconciled before it was too late, before Judy and Judd died at a great age. I don't know what I would do in a situation like that. I get it about the survivors. I understand their anger. Don't know what I'd do. But I don't know, it just seems to me as if my old friends Judd and Judy have gotten the point of the gospel, that there is no debt so large that God won't forgive, and therefore we should too. They refuse to repay evil for evil, and therefore they are my exemplars for taking thought for what is noble in the sight of all. After all, isn't that how Jesus spent the last hours of his life? According to Luke, anyway. With his last languishing breath, he said, Father, forgive. Forgive them all. Forgive my craven, fleeing friends. Forgive self-righteous Caiaphas and expedient Pilate and Judas, the infidel, and Peter, the denier, and the indifferent soldiers and the jeering, sneering crowds. Forgive them all. And then Jesus turns to this vile miscreant right beside him, who has shown nothing but violence and malice all his days. And Jesus says, friend, I tell you truly, this day you will be with me in Elysian fields. Sheer, unmerited grace. That is the zenith of humanity. That's what's noble. The great astronomer Nicholas Copernicus told his friends the epitaph he wanted carved into his tombstone. Lord, I dare not ask for the faith you gave Paul, nor for the courage you gave Peter, but the grace you showed the thief on the cross, that, Lord, show to me.